Hello, Ben. There was a time where the word mother exclusively described a woman in relation to her biological offspring, but our definition has since shifted to account for adoption, leaving us with a more social and less biological outlook on motherhood. My question for you is how affirming transgender identity is such a threat to biology when we have clear precedent for similar shifts in language?
Okay, so usually there is a distinction. You can call somebody mother, but then an adoptive mother is not going to be insulted when you say biological mother. Right? An adopted mother is not going to say that biological mother is an inappropriate term. The trans movement claims that the term biological female is somehow offensive. The trans movement will claim that female encompasses not biology somehow. It's a bizarrely illogical categorization. So the trans movement is not a threat to biology. Biology is biology. People will continue to reproduce. I mean, some of us. But in any case, the no implication made. But in any case, some people will continue to reproduce. Those reproductive relationships will be almost entirely male female. The only exceptions would be in vitro or artificial insemination, which will be an extraordinarily tiny percentage of actual inseminations and pregnancies. So biology is not threatened. Truth is threatened. I'm not worried about biology being threatened. If you want to threaten your own biology, I mean, that's your prerogative. But truth, the idea that male refers to a biological category as opposed to an idea that you have in your head that is unverifiable by any sort of objective reality, that is something that nobody who cares about truth should acquiesce to. The entire way that we communicate is through words that have mutually agreed upon definitions. And the definition of a word cannot be an Ouroboros that eats itself. It can't be a woman is anyone who says they are a woman, which is a woman. It's completely circular. That has no definition. If you want to define a category, the category has to have definition. And any attempt to broaden that category out to include things that are clearly not in that category, and in fact, there are only two categories, male and female. They're actually in the other category. That is a fundamental assault on the truth, and nobody should accept that.
In one of your more infamous debates, you said, "I'm not going to modify basic biology because it threatens your subjective sense of what you are."
Yes.
My argument is not that terms like biological female or biological male are necessarily offensive. My argument is that you are saying that referring to a trans woman as a woman or a trans man as a man or et cetera, is like inherently offensive or threatens biology. And I'm curious why it's so threatened when there's clear precedent for changing the language.
Again, the term mother does not include father. Every category has to have boundaries. The boundary of female starts at male. And when you start including male in the category of female, you are threatening biological definitions as well as basic truth.
Well, you could say the category of mother starts at conception or, a biological relation to an offspring. But as we know,
but again, the idea that the idea of motherhood being the act of mothering, right? And that is a female. A female does the act of mothering. You can say that a female who does the act of mothering is a mother, but you also have a special category called biological motherhood. I'm not going to say that an adoptive mom and a biological mom have precisely the same definition. They don't. They're underneath a subset of category called motherhood. That motherhood sometimes involves birth, sometimes it does not, but it certainly involves being a female.
What do you think about the distinction between cis women and trans women?
Explain.
Well, you're saying that a more inclusive usage of the word mother isn't particularly offensive because we also have biological mother.
Yes.
We've offered the term cis woman and even biological woman or assigned female at birth. We've offered a variety of terms that properly categorize people.
Again, you cannot extend the term woman to apply to a biological male. Every category has an endpoint. If there are only two categories, male and female, and you say that female now is in this category, there are no definitions. There are no definitions. I mean, to paraphrase my friend Matt Walsh, I'm going to need you to explain what a woman is without reference to the word woman. We can go on all day like this, but...
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily circular to say that a woman is someone who exhibits womanhood.
Yes, it is.
And that...
It is definitionally circular.
Well...
That's like saying a hand is something that fundamentally shows handhood.
Wait a second. 45 seconds ago, wasn't his definition of mother somebody who does mothering?
Yeah. Yeah, and also he started out by saying that like you can't put certain things in, you can't put different things in different categories. But then he was like, well, when it comes to like adopted mothers, like it's not precisely the same. Like I understand there's like a subcategory.
Yeah, no, I mean, it just seems like, I mean, I know we're not quite done with this exchange yet, but I've got to say it is really funny that that like when he said explain, and then this very conservative crowd like does this sort of like round of warm laughter. Look, that tells me that these people are just responding to tone and confidence and vibes. They're not responding to the argument, because if you're actually paying attention to the argument, sorry, Shapiro is being destroyed right now. Right? What's that?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, because everything, because he has been completely unsuccessful in answering the original challenge. And this is a very good challenge. I don't know if she read my book or not, but but Give Them an Argument, the book in 2019, like explores this exact analogy, right? It's obviously not original to me, but like, I talk about this in that book specifically with reference to Shapiro, right? And things that he said about this. And so her challenge to him was, all right, you're going to say that biology is somehow, that like we're rejecting the truth about biology if we use the word woman to describe a trans woman. But hold on, how is that different from saying the thing that you presumably wouldn't say, because it would be obviously insane to say, which is that like we're insulting biology, or we're not, we're rejecting the truth if we apply the word mother to an adoptive mother, right? Why is that? Why is the structure of one in any way, shape, or form different from the structure of the other? And nothing he said has touched that, right? Like he talks quickly. He sounds very confident. He exudes confidence, which, she doesn't, because she's a college undergraduate who's, this may very well be the first time she's ever like asked a question at like a public event with lots of people in it. But no, he's, she's just 100% right about this, that the argument that he's making against referring to trans women as women could just as easily be made against referring to adoptive mothers as mother. I mean, he just has not pointed out yet a single disanalogy between those cases. When he says, and when he says, oh, some trans activists, he says the trans movement, as if they all held a big vote about it and decided that this was their position, right? But it's like, yeah, said some trans activists dislike the term biological female. Okay, fine. Let's just take it as read that they're wrong to dislike that. But that's not the question. The question is your position, which is that we should never apply the word woman to a trans woman. We should never use female pronouns to describe trans women, right? That because of biology, right? Is that position consistent with your willingness to refer to adoptive mothers as mothers? Because clearly that's a case where we have a term where, yeah, there's a biological definition. There's also a social definition that everybody understands. In most cases, they overlap. Sometimes they don't, right? Like where mothers, you have adoptive mothers, or you have mothers, who gave their babies up for adoption, whatever, right? But he hasn't pointed out to a single. He has yet to point to a single relevant difference between those cases. He said that that people that there's he said that it's very hard to come up with a definition, which man, Ben, I've got bad news for you about conceptual analysis in general, right? So conceptual analysis is the thing that philosophers will often try to do, where they try to come up with a definition for some important concept in terms of necessary and sufficient conditions. This is like when Socrates is going around Athens asking people to, define, justice, or, tell them what is the good or whatever. Notoriously very difficult to do, right? That's why he was so annoying that they killed him. Wittgenstein in the 20th century says that, he has this famous discussion of like trying to give a conceptual analysis of a game, right? What exactly is the definition of game? We all feel like we know what a game is, right? But like, what are the actual necessary and sufficient conditions that, football, has in common with chess, has in common with tag, that are going to like explain what it is that makes these things games. And Wittgenstein famously just gives up on it, right? He says it's impossible, that all you can say about the concept is that it's a family resemblance. And there just is no definition we can give in necessary and sufficient conditions. Other people since then have disagreed and like offered suggested definitions, and people argue about whether those definitions work. But like, Wittgenstein's a very smart guy, right? Couldn't do it. Even like words like table and chair, when you start to like really try to give precise definitions of those things in terms of necessary and sufficient condition, it gets very difficult very quickly. There's a famous Twitter exchange. I do not remember who this was, but it's some Twitter person who's obsessed with trans people, was like, oh, define woman. And, somebody said, well, define chair. And he's like, oh, a thing that, he gave like 2 or 3 conditions. And it's like, you sit on it and you kicks it low to the ground, you sit and all this stuff. And then somebody like gives him a picture of a horse and said, okay, so this counts as a chair on the definition that you just gave, right? Like, all of which is just to say people having a hard time, and it being hard to give a precise definition of something is not really the knockdown argument that there's no coherent concept that he thinks it is. But also, putting that aside, he didn't give a precise definition of woman, of mother, right? Like, so in terms of the challenge the student originally raised for him, what is the difference between accepting both biological and non-biological meanings of mother and accepting both biological and non-biological meanings of woman? He just hasn't risen to the challenge yet. He hasn't given a single distinction between
one of his first answers to that was quote, adopted mothers won't be offended if you call them biological mothers. That was one of his answers.
Yeah, I think what he was saying is that adoptive mothers won't be offended by being told that they're not biological mothers. And it's like, yeah, okay, fair enough. They wouldn't. But also,
maybe they haven't like gotten together and spoken on this.
Fair point. But even if it's true, it's like, yeah, okay. But also, like, take 10 seconds to try to imagine a world where whether adoptive parenthood was legitimate was like a hot topic of the culture war. And like where you had like right-wing school principals who refused to allow adoptive parents to go to parent-teacher conferences because words have meaning, damn it, and and I'm not going to deny biology by allowing an adoptive parent to go to a parent-teacher conference. These conferences are only for biological parents. I'll bet after the first 10,000 times adoptive parents had heard that, they would start to get a little prickly about the phrase biological parent too, because they were so used to hearing people invoke that in the course of trying to deny their rights. And certainly, sure, even accepting for the sake of argument that like most adoptive parents, I mean, for the most part, kind of depends. If you never told your kid they were adopted, you probably are going to be pretty upset if somebody says that, right? But yeah, even if he's right that most adoptive parents wouldn't be bothered by the phrase, biological parent, or by being told that they're not biological parents, you know what would 100% for sure bother them? Telling them that they're not parents, right? Which would be the exact equivalent of saying trans women are not women, full stop, right?
Yeah.
Like the exact equivalent would be telling an adoptive parent that they're not a parent. And of course that would bother them. So that's not a disanalogy. And
or that the kid is not a kid for that matter,
that's not your kid, right?
Parents at school board meetings, I'm not having my kid sharing a bathroom with some kid who's adopted,
Yeah. And then the other one is that the only other attempt I think he's made that we haven't talked about is that when he said, oh, well, for any concept, there always has to be a border to that concept. And again, he just sounds so fucking confident. right? That it's easy for people who basically like him to nod along at all this without thinking about it. But it's like, for every concept, there has to be a border of that concept, and the border of the female is male. And, by the way, when he says male and female are the only two categories, even if we are strictly talking about the biological stuff here, not gender identity, clearly not true, right? There are people with intersex conditions, but whatever, forget that, right? Maybe I guess you would say that's not a different category. That's like an overlap of the categories or whatever. But like, clearly it's not true that the only thing other than people who are clearly female is people who are clearly male. But also when he says this, like he makes this move, it's like, oh, well, every category has to exclude something for there to be a border, or else there's no definition there, right? If it means something, there has to be things that its meaning excludes, and therefore, if any definition of woman has to exclude males, okay, hold up. Why couldn't you make precisely the same move for motherhood? That every definition has to exclude something, right? So mother has to exclude not only non-women, right, but like women who didn't give birth.
Yeah.
Like what would be the disanalogy between those two arguments? It's just completely incoherent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, what I
A
have to
tree
say
is something that demonstrates the qualities of treehood. What new actual definitional content have you added to the word?
I can define womanhood for you, which is a set of characteristics associated with females, and a woman as someone who exhibits said womanhood.
Okay, well, you have just used the word female and woman to define each other. So you say a woman is a female, but not a biological female. A female is a woman, and a woman is a female.
This is so uncharitable. Obviously, she does mean biological female, right? Like what she's saying is that she's actually giving a pretty credible definition. I mean, she's on the spot at a Q&A. She's not like writing a philosophy paper, but but I think that her point is that, look, clearly there's this set of characteristics that we associate with biological females. And so, there's the same way that like there's a relationship that we associate with biological mothers and their children. And you're saying that, a woman who's in that relationship with her children as a mother, even if she's not actually a biological mother, similarly, that there's a set of characteristics, mental, behavioral, whatever, that we associate with biological females, that like we could say in the social sense, you're a woman if you exhibit those characteristics, even if you're not a biological woman. That's clearly what she's saying, right? So it's like, whether you accept that or not, I'm sure we could have like a fascinating like graduate seminar where we spend 2 hours arguing about whether that's a good definition or not. But it's not just trivially circular the way he's trying to suggest.
Mm-hmm.
But at no point have you added any new content.
No, I said a woman is someone who exhibits womanhood, and womanhood is a set of characteristics.
Yes, and that doesn't mean anything.
Why? How does it not
the
mean
reason
anything?
it doesn't mean okay. Again, a dog is a thing that exhibits the characteristics of doghood. It's a set of characteristics characterized by being a dog. I've added no content to that. If you have no idea what a dog is, you still have no idea what a dog is.
There are plenty of labels that refer to concepts. This is not a new thing.
It's not a label referring to a concept. It's a label that's referring to the same word as the concept. You can't do that. It's fundamentally circular.
To the same word. I'm saying that womanhood.
You have not defined even womanhood. You said a set of characteristics that applies to females, and then you're applying it to males. So clearly, this is nonsensical. I'm sorry that it doesn't. I'm sorry that your attempts to worm a definition into nonsense are not succeeding. But like, I can't make that fit into logic because it doesn't. I mean, I'm sorry.
Hi there. All right.
Howdy.
So
I don't do a lot of speaking as a sentences, but like, come on, man. I speaking here as somebody who knows much, much, much more about logic than Ben Shapiro does. What he just said didn't mean anything, right? And like, I don't just mean like what I say makes more sense than what he does or something like that. Using but no, it like my doctoral, like I have a PhD. My doctoral dissertation was about the philosophy of logic. I have a book from an academic press that's about logic. I've taught like formal and informal logic classes many times at many universities. I know way more about that than he does. And And the idea that he can't fit it into logic is just kind of nonsense. I think that like, even if you, what does logic have to do with this? Right? Like, is he saying that it's inconsistent? If so, how? He hasn't told us, right? Is he just saying that, sounds like what he's saying is that, and again, the reason to do that little appeal to expertise thing that I would normally not do is just like to explain why I'm so confident that he's just spouting nonsense when he says that like logic is the thing he can't fit it into, right? Like, this is, if there are any number of subjects that he could have invoked, they'd be like, oh, I don't know, maybe he knows something I don't, right? But like, no, that's not one of them. I'm sorry, it's not, right? Like, this is, what does logic have to do with this? Like, what you're saying is that you don't think it's an informative definition. Okay. But one, I think it's a ludicrously uncharitable straw man interpretation of the definition, right? Because, I mean, even if she wasn't confident enough or quick enough on her feet to say, oh, I meant biological female, that does seem like the obvious interpretation of what she was saying, that, womanhood is defined by a set of characteristics that are typically associated with biological females. Two, notice he hasn't given a definition either. Ask him to define biological female, right? Yeah. Like, he hasn't done that, right? Like, if you mean, like, I think what most people mean, which is about, different biological characteristics, it's like a certain cluster of characteristics. Like, most people don't have precise definitions. Some people will say, oh, well, there is this exact binary definition, which is large and small gametes. But I don't think that's what most people really mean. And I think that, before people even knew about that part of science, I think they were making this distinction. But also, like, look, even if there's not a precise definition, right? Lots of concepts don't have precise definitions. As I said, it's very, very difficult to pin down precise definitions, and that's just not a good enough reason to think that it's a meaningless concept, or you can't fit it into logic. That's just, it's just the level of, like, in some ways, even though, like, I actually think this is very far from the worst thing that you said in this video. Like, I think if you, like, insist on, referring to somebody as something that doesn't, line up with, with the labels they identify with, I think that's very asshole-ish. But, like, I don't think it's as bad as defending genocide, right? Like, so it's, like, very far from the morally worst thing you said. But I think this, like, might actually annoy me the most out of everything he's said so far, just because, like, he's so smug about it, but he just does not have an argument to back it up.
Yeah, and I do think that, like, talking this fast does a lot of work for him,
Totally. And just the confidence, the tone, right? It's like he sounds so sure that, like, I think it makes most people question whether they're missing something.
And they probably are, because I think if you do, like, really like, pay attention as much as you can to what he's saying, one thing you'll notice quickly is, like, how much you're missing because he's talking too fast, like, or how certain things don't seem to mean much. There are a lot of nebulous phrases.
Totally. So Skelwum from the chat says, wouldn't the Sorites paradox refute the concepts have to have clear boundaries? Yeah. Right. So the classic Sorites thing is, like, how many rocks do you have to have together for it to count as a heap of rocks?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I don't know. Right. Like, it's like, I know, I know what doesn't seem like a heap, right? If there are, like, 2 rocks together on the ground, I know that if there are, like, 20 rocks altogether, that I would call that heap. I don't know where the boundary line is, or, like, the sort of classic thing I always do if I'm unpacking this, like, giving a talk or something, is I'll just, like, pick somebody who's completely bald in the audience and be like, all right, start with that guy's head of hair, add 1 hair to it. Is he still bald? Everybody's like, yeah, he's still bald, right? All right, add another hair. Is he still bald? And, it's like, look, how many hairs have to be on your head for you to count as not bald. Well, how about if somebody said you have to have exactly 40,537 hairs to count as not being bald? That seems insane, and not really because you picked the wrong number, right? Like, it's just like the idea that if you had 40,536, you wouldn't be bald, but you would be bald. But if you had 40,537, you wouldn't be. Seems obviously wrong. So that leads to the thought, okay, well, maybe one hair more or less can't make a difference, but that can't be right either, because apply the principle that one hair can't make a difference a million times in a row, and now you're saying that somebody who has like a very full head of hair counts as bald, right? So that's what the puzzle is, the paradox, right? It seems like, there has to be a strict cutoff, but it doesn't seem like there can be a strict cutoff. But whatever you make of that, right? One thing that pretty much everybody who's thought about it agrees on is that what we can't do is say that just because it's a little vague or unclear where the boundary of something is, that means that the concept just doesn't mean anything, right? That there is no distinction between bald and not bald, right? Like, so yeah, the idea, I think that's totally right. I think that's a good point. You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.